Hey, it's Jay. I wanted to extend a special thanks to those of you who have listened and left reviews on iTunes for this podcast. Please leave a review if you haven't done so already. We sincerely appreciate it. We're producing this show independently, and unfortunately, that is not free. We have to pay for digital hosting space, software, equipment, websites, and travel out of our own pockets. But we'd love to keep this show going as long as possible. Please show your support for this podcast and give it life by making a donation to www.bigbuckregistry.com/donate or pledge your support by visiting www.bigbuckregistry.com/pledge. You can also find our app in our Apple App Store called Big Buck Deer Hunter 2015 and in the Google Play Store for Google and Android devices. Thanks for your support and enjoy the show. Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 104, The Pope and Young Club, with special guest President Jim Willems. Origins, myths, rules, and mission. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Good evening, this is Matt Goodlife from across the pond. I'm a passionate deer hunter, and you're listening to one of my favorite deer hunting podcasts in the world, the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, this is Melissa Bachman of Winchester Deadly Passion on the Sportsman's Channel. You're listening to my favorite deer hunting podcast, Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey, this is Julie McQueen with Brotherhood Outdoors, and you are listening to my favorite podcast on iTunes, the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Welcome to the show. This is Jay Scott, your host of the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. I am super psyched for you to be joining me again on this adventure as we go through our life of deer hunting, and I could not be happier to be joined by my good friend from Ohio, Dusty Phillips. What's happening, Dusty?
Oh, man, it's raining cats and dogs. It's just wet here.
It's monsoon season in Ohio.
Oh, my goodness. Unreal.
What's up with that?
I really don't know. In a sense, it's a little bit scary. Like we've had like 6 inches of rain in 3 days.
It's a lot of rain, man.
Yeah, it's just pounding us, They're calling pound it all the way till like Tuesday of next week. Yeah, here it's wet.
What's that going to do to the crops? Does that hurt the crops that you've already planted if you've already done so?
As long as they're out of the ground, it's not too bad. Not saying it can't do damage, because too much water is no good either.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. Are you going to do any bow hunting this fall, Dusty?
Come on now. Is that a question?
Yeah, stupid question. Of course you are. It's like, well, we're not even going to say anything beyond that. But yeah, I know you're going to bow hunt, and one of the things that we talk about from time to time are records and record bucks, and certainly there are bucks that are record breakers and some that are worthy of being in record books, and some that we shoot that are just worthy of being in our own records. So we've talked to Boone and Crockett before, and I thought it was appropriate, as the requests have come in, to also cover the other record keeper that is, or the third record keeper that I think we recognize the most, being Boone and Crockett, Buckmasters, and Pope and Young, one of the more recognized names that we hear for record trophy bucks. And in this case, Pope and Young, they just keep bow records. So I thought it would be cool to get them on the air, because it's one of the topics that is requested the most of any topic that we get from our audience.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
So what I've done, Dusty, is I've gone out and I've tracked down Jim Willems, who is the president, the very president of the Pope and Young Club. How about that?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Super excited.
You want to know everything there is to know about Pope and Young? Then this is the show to listen to, where we cover the origins of the club, to the myths that have gotten out there. You know how a rumor gets started and then it gets transformed and then it's a different rumor by the time it gets back to you. It has nothing to do with what you originally told somebody. We cover some of that. And we also cover all the rules. Some new rules are new. We talk about some of the new technology that's constantly being introduced into the hunting industry and how it affects the fair chase, or what we consider fair chase, and what they think influences fair chase. And what's interesting is, as the years have gone by, the view of what helps you overcome a fair chase situation has changed. Much like, for example, used to be all recurve bows were allowed to be entered into the record books. And then when the compound came out, it was frowned upon. Like, it wasn't even considered because it was too high tech. It gave you that edge. But today we don't even think about it.
Right, for sure.
Right. So, but that's a constant thing. You know, as new technologies are developed, you have to analyze it. Does it really give you an unfair advantage over the game? And sometimes we have to adjust the rules once they realize it doesn't really give you an advantage. So we talk about all that kind of stuff, and we talk about the mission of what Pope and Young is all about.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear the story.
Yeah, it's a pretty good interview. So
let's do it.
All right. Jim Willems, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. How's it going, Jim?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on.
We're psyched. We're psyched to have you on. We don't get a chance to talk to somebody from Pope and Young all the time. And when I came across this opportunity, I jumped all over it. So I really appreciate you spending some time with us to talk about what Pope and Young is all about, and maybe give us a little history lesson. And, of course, you have to share a good deer hunting story with us. That's the prerequisite for being on the show.
Okay, I can definitely do that.
Excellent. So, Jim, tell us where you're at right now and what your position is with Pope and Young.
Well, I live in Farmington, New Mexico, which is the northwest corner of New Mexico. Been here for 28 years and moved here when I was 25 to take advantage of all the different game animals they have in this part of the country. That's why I live here. I grew up in Kansas, but I, moved out here, took a job, found a job, and in New Mexico, you can hunt a whole lot of different species, even a few exotics. And where I'm at, I'm not very far from Colorado. I hunt Colorado a lot. I hunt Arizona when I can. I hunt Utah very seldom, but that's just because they don't have a lot of opportunity. Not that I'm not trying.
Gotcha. Okay.
I got ran for the position of president of the Pope and Young Club a little over a year ago, and I was elected. And so I've been at it for a little over a year. Been through one convention, and hopefully we're going in the right direction and doing the things that the bow hunters want us to do.
Gotcha. Let's get down to some of the fundamentals of Pope and Young. Pope and Young has become one of the most sought after topics from our audience and our listenership. And so this is a perfect opportunity to explain what Pope and Young is all about. Can we go back to like the roots of where Pope and Young came from, and when did it come together? What was the purpose? What's the mission?
Okay, well that's a pretty simple answer. It started as an idea back in the 1950s. Basically anybody who had anything to do with archery was a member of the National Field Archery Association, the NFAA back then. And back then there was way more target archers than there were bow hunters. There just weren't a lot of bow hunters, and part of the problem was, it's hard to believe now, but in some of the Midwest states there just wasn't much to hunt. There just wasn't a lot of deer. So if you enjoyed shooting a bow, you shot on the weekends with your friends, but a few hardcore hunters decided that they wanted to be bow hunters. And one of the issues was most states, not only did they not have a archery only season, a lot of them didn't even let you hunt with a bow and arrow. Once again, that's hard to believe today. But they'd gone through the times when there just weren't any animals because of all of the market hunting and basically let the animals out, and because of sport hunters from way back, and because of the Pittman-Robertson Act, and because of our North American model of wildlife conservation, they eventually brought all these animals back, which, there's more animals now than there probably has been for hundreds of years. So I'm getting off track a little bit.
Oh, that's okay. We like cages. That's okay.
Yeah, so we have these hardcore hunters, a very small group in the NFAA, who were determined to get states to have archery seasons. And this was before there was archery only season, so a lot of them settled for just making the bow legal in the rifle season. So that's where it started. And to facilitate that, a handful of people decided, well, if we had an organization like Boone and Crockett that was bow only, that would show that bow hunters were able to kill, not only just kill animals to eat, but get out and trophy hunt and kill some record class animals, then that would show that bow hunting was a viable conservation and recreation activity to go along with just regular hunting. So through the NFAA, late 50s, they started the record-keeping organization, and at some point they decided that it was time to split off and start a new organization for record keeping and for advocating for bow seasons all over the country.
Okay.
So in 1961, the club officially formed and applied for nonprofit status and got that, and started the Pope and Young Club, which originally was, we are the record keeping organization, so that was the original function. But that was a tool to be used to create opportunity, to open up areas and open up seasons and open up states. And, it started early 60s. And apparently we were really successful because now we have archery-only seasons all over the place, all over the world in some places. And
sure,
bow hunters, the number of bow hunters are just phenomenal compared to what it was, 50 years ago.
Oh, definitely. No question
so
about
that's
it.
That's the beginnings.
Gotcha. So it is a record-keeping group that is out to promote archery hunting. And
that's correct.
Keep records of archery kills of specifically deer, but other species as well?
Yeah, every North American species, all North American big game species.
Okay.
Which, I hesitate to say that because now we're dealing with some states. The wolf is a big game species, and some states even turkey is considered a big game.
Right.
But we recognize 29 different specific species and subspecies of animals. But it's North America only.
Gotcha. I remember growing up when we were talking about bigger deer, and everybody would say, "Oh, that might make the record books. It might be in Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young." And almost for a while, because we didn't know any better, the Pope and Young and Boone and Crockett were used synonymously as just a symbol of a big deer. So,
okay.
But there is a difference. I mean, there's a distinct difference in that Pope and Young only recognizes archery records, correct?
That's correct.
Firearm records.
That is correct. And to clarify a little bit, under some of today's rules, the Pope and Young Club recognizes archery records, but it has to be a handheld, hand-drawn bow, which is compounds, recurves, longbows.
Okay.
We
would
don't
that
accept
exclude?
Crossbow kills.
Okay, that was my next question. Okay, so no crossbows. Has to be a hand-drawn instrument.
Hand-drawn and handheld.
Handheld.
Yeah, you have to hold it back with your own power.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
What other rules apply beyond
Well, we demand that the animal is taken under the rules of fair chase. Okay. And that varies a little bit by animal, but basically what it means is you can't use a spotlight. You can't shoot them if they're disabled in water or snow or in a trap. You have to follow the state guidelines. It has to be legally taken. You have to have a valid permit to take that animal. So for the most part, that's what we mean when we talk about fair chase. And that's another somewhat controversial discussion because some people don't believe baiting bears is fair, baiting any animals is fair. And then you get into the hound hunting for mountain lions. There's questions about that. But what it really comes down to is what's generally acceptable.
Okay.
Within the hunting community. So that's kind of where we go.
So are we saying that baiting and using dogs is not fair chase, or it is?
No, it is fair chase as far as we're concerned.
Okay.
But, that's, like I said, that's a little bit controversial. Some people don't believe that you should be able to do that.
Right.
But we do, because it's, like I said, it's generally accepted that that's okay to do. And that's the first place you start when you consider what is fair and what isn't.
Right. And definitely some gray area depending upon what your beliefs are. But
absolutely. And those are people's personal beliefs.
Right.
But as a record keeping organization, we have to be careful not to inject our own personal beliefs if 80 or 90% of the bow hunting public believes it's okay just because a handful of leaders within the club thinks it's not. That's not necessarily the right thing to do. So,
right.
So I think we've done a pretty good job of being accepting, especially more recently, of more of what's legal within the states.
Right. And there's no question baiting and using dogs are traditions that go way, way back. It's not like a new technology. This is, who knows how long that's been going on. So right. Although it's gray area, it's been a recognized practice for years and years and years and years.
Yeah, that's correct.
Are there any new technologies that have come into the scene in the last 10, 15, 20 years that is a controversial piece for Pope and Young? Maybe, for example, like the game camera. How do you guys look at that kind of stuff as new technology introduces itself to the industry?
Well, that's something that we battle with constantly, and you can go all the way back to when they first glued fiberglass to wood to make a more efficient longbow or recurve, and then the compound bow came along, and that was before my time, but there's no doubt that was very controversial, that a whole bunch of die-hard bow hunters didn't think that should be allowed. Hard to believe today, but that was controversial. But more recently, the Pope and Young Club, 12, 15 years ago, made a rule that no electronic equipment was allowed on the bow or arrow. And if it was, then it didn't pass our fair chase requirements. So a few years ago, well, over about the last 5 or 6 years, we've had to deal with the lighted knock issue.
Right.
And it was a big controversy for a while. And basically what it came down to is we had to adjust our rules to accept lighted knocks because they really don't affect taking the animal at all.
Right.
It's more of a visual aid, and certainly for the video people, it's a huge advantage for video, but it really doesn't give you an advantage as far as shooting the animal.
Gotcha.
So our original no electronics rule, which was intended for other things, I do believe, made it difficult on people who wanted to use lighted knocks, and also another more popular thing more recently is a bow-mounted camera, a GoPro or
sure.
a Tacticam or something like that.
Super popular these days.
Yeah, so we had to adjust our rules to accept those because neither one of those items really have anything to do with the fair chase.
Right. They don't interrupt fair chase at all. It's just an additional means that won't affect how you're pursuing the game.
That's correct.
When did those rules change regarding knocks and cameras on bows?
1 year ago.
1 year ago. Okay. That's
correct.
So
yeah, it was a controversial and divisive issue for a while, and just a number of people didn't want it to change, and it has a little bit to do with why I was elected president, because I felt like we need to get past this and accept it and move on. And it was one of the first things that I did, along with a few new board members, that we finally had the votes on the board to make the change.
Mm-hmm.
So we made that change, and it goes back retroactive. If you shot an animal 6 years ago with lighted knocks, you can now enter it if you would like.
That was my next question. Does it retroactive back through all the deer that have been shot? They were trying to get it in, but turned out or learned that there was a lighted knock. That must be...
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
It is retroactive, and it it ended up being a pretty big issue recently because our new world record grizzly bear was shot in Alaska, I don't know, 4 years ago, with a guy using a lighted knock, and for a number of years we didn't accept it, but once we changed our rules and we did accept it, and now it is the new world record, and it's also the largest grizzly bear ever taken by a hunter with any weapon.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is.
Fascinating.
So it's not the Boone and Crockett world record because they accept picked up heads, and there are 2 heads that were found by somebody and entered that are bigger, but this is the biggest grizzly bear ever taken by a hunter with any weapon. So that's fairly neat.
That's a big deal.
It is.
So going back to like as new technology is introduced into the world, and it sounded like from what you were saying that recurves were the only bow on the planet, and then along came the compound bow. Was that a controversial situation like lighted knocks were a year ago?
Well, like I said, that was before my time, but there's no doubt in my mind that it was probably even a bigger controversy among the voting members of the Pope and Young Club who decide on whether or not to change the rules, to change the bylaws, and to change definition of a bow, and to change what we accept and we don't accept. And this was late 60s, early 70s when all of this happened, and I wasn't there, but I've heard it was a pretty big deal at the time.
I would imagine it must have just rocked the world of Pope and Young back then, because
I'm sure it did.
Had to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the difference between now and then was we just didn't have the communication and the instant information that you have now. And on top of that, they're just the number of bow hunters compared to what we have now is maybe single digit percentage wise. There may have been 5% of the bow hunters in the late 60s as we have now. So even though it was probably a pretty big deal within the bow hunting community, it was such a small community that it probably didn't even register on the Richter scale compared to some of the minor things we deal with today.
Okay. Has the mission changed since the 60s?
No, not really.
Okay.
No. Our mission is to protect bow hunting, ensure bow hunting's future, protecting its heritage and promoting its past. And that's always been our mission. I'm sure the mission statement's been rewritten slightly over and over the years, but for the most part, we want to ensure the future of bow hunting. That's what we're all about.
Okay. All right.
That's why we started, and that's where we're still at.
What's your biggest challenge today as an organization?
Probably new hunter recruitment. We're losing hunters. And not by a lot, but it's a gradual loss. It's a combination of that, and part of it, along with that, is losing opportunity. It's harder to find a place to hunt. If you live in the West, where there's a lot of public land, you have plenty of places to hunt, but now it's getting harder to get a license. So it's maintaining what we've had and moving forward and trying to recruit enough new bow hunters to keep what we have.
Gotcha. Do you see a decline in archers overall compared to gun hunters, or is it a steady decline for both?
Well, I see a little bit of an increase for archers. One thing we're dealing with now is a lot of states have implemented crossbow seasons, but then a lot of those states don't quantify whether you're shooting a conventional bow or a crossbow. So if there's an increase in bow hunters, is it because rifle hunters are switching over to a compound, or is it just more bow hunters?
Right.
So as far as bow hunting, we're not doing as bad as hunting overall. And especially the last few years, I think we've gained some. And there's a lot of really good programs to recruit new bow hunters and get them started, and mentoring and giving them opportunities. So hopefully we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. Do you think that there will ever be a day that Pope and Young allows crossbow kills to be entered into the record books?
I don't foresee that happening. Before that'll ever happen, I expect that crossbows will have their own record book. And the thing is, it's just not bow hunting. You're shooting a weapon that you don't have to draw and hold back. to be honest, a crossbow is closer to a muzzleloader. It's basically a single shot, shoulder-mounted weapon, and that's not what bow hunting is. So the short answer is I don't see it ever happening. Of course, ask me again in 30 years when somebody else is in charge of the club.
Right. And I'm sure 30 years ago, when the compound was introduced, that might have been that could never happen type of answer too.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Right. Well, you never know. But it is different. There is definitely a mechanism by which the arrow flies from a compound compared to there's still a primitive nature of a bow in general, correct? I mean,
yeah, that's correct. And you have to look back at why we began bow hunting to begin with. And we took up bow hunting, most of us, at least kind of on the older generation, we took it up because it was harder.
Right.
And the advent of the crossbow makes it a whole lot easier. And that's really not why we started and why we're out there. It's not about making it easier and killing more animals and shooting farther and all of that. We really did this because we wanted to do it the hard way.
Right. And that makes sense, because if you really wanted to just go kill, you could. And you would ignore all the laws, but you could realistically just kill every day. But those are called poachers. And
that's
right?
Correct.
That's just not who we are as hunters, or shouldn't be as hunters. We should, in a lot of ways, making it harder is a very fundamental aspect of what hunting should be in the first place, so that you're providing a fair chase to the animal.
You're absolutely correct. And on the same note, Boone and Crockett being more of a rifle hunting organization, because, honestly, most of their entries are taken with the rifle because it's more efficient. But they're struggling as well with the long range shooting, the 800,000 yard shooting. They're struggling about how much of that is fair chase, and
right.
And are we really hunting anymore, or are we just are we just shooters? So it's something that we all have to deal with, and it's a fine line between being an advocate for fair chase and honorable means of hunting, and then being considered the equipment police.
Right.
And you really don't want to get that reputation of being the equipment or technique police. You really want to encourage people to just consider why you're out there hunting to begin with.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to me. Now, did you know that in England, for example, that in the 60s, bow hunting was outlawed?
Yes.
It's fascinating. We said last week's show was with Matt Goodlife, who is a gamekeeper from England. And I asked him if there was any bow hunting in England, and he said, "Oh, here we go," because he knew I was going to touch on this topic, and it seems to come up quite frequently when you talk about people who are hunting in the UK versus people who are used to bow hunting in the United States. What do you have to say about that?
Well, and interestingly, about 6 months ago, an individual who works for a German company in the United States asked the question, why is bow hunting legal and considered ethical in the United States? And my first response was, well, why wouldn't it be? Because, we grew up with this and we've known that. But what it came down to is he was having to answer to his German managers who really don't believe that it's ethical, why we're supporting bow hunting in the United States. So once you wrap your mind around that, you have to consider why they don't think it's legal and ethical. And really what it amounts to is they don't have a Pope and Young club that goes out and shows what can be done, which is amazing with all of the video and the media in general, that it shows how efficient we are. But they just didn't have the organization to come out and say, okay, this is what we're doing. Here's how many animals we're killing. Here's how effective we are. We've done wounding studies in the United States that show we're basically the same as rifle hunters. And today, Americans, we just take that for granted. Bow hunting is just who we are and who we've always been, but that's not true. We haven't always been able to do that.
Right. I completely agree with you on that. Jim, do you have a preference what kind of bow you shoot?
Well, yeah, I do. I've been shooting not the same bow, but the same basic bow since 1983.
Oh, really?
And
Interesting.
I started shooting a bighorn recurve in 1983 after about 5 years of shooting a compound. And I've shot that bow or one similar to it every year except one. When I shot a Robertson recurve for 1 year. I shot a bighorn longbow for 1 year. But every other year since then, I've shot a bighorn recurve, and the only thing that really changes is different limbs, different weights.
Okay.
And the only exception is I bought a Hoyt compound bow in 2008 to go Cape Buffalo hunting in Africa.
Yeah.
And I used that bow in Africa for a couple of years, and then for some interesting circumstances, I ended up using that bow on a brown bear hunt in Alaska last year. So in 35 years of, well, I guess in the last 32 years, almost exclusively with a recurve bow, except for 2 African hunts and 1 Alaskan hunt.
Gotcha. Now, what is it about that bow that you like so much?
Well, it's just comfortable. And, there's faster bows. Every bow is a little bit different. But once you get used to shooting a bow, I don't want to say you don't have to practice as much, because I still practice a lot. But if something comes up and I'm out of town for a month and, I don't practice for 6 weeks, I can go out tomorrow and hit really well with it. And this is a traditional no sight, just shooting instinctively. And it's just a part of me, I guess.
Why can you do that? Is it just the nature of that type of bow where you can take 6 months off? No,
it's repetition.
Okay.
It's practice. It's 30 plus years of shooting the same way, shooting the same targets. And, after a while, it's just a part of what you do.
Gotcha. Okay. I was wondering if you could take us on a memorable deer hunt, Jim. I have a picture here of a nice deer that I believe is a Kansas whitetail that was perhaps taken on your own property. Could you take us through the 48 hours up until the kill shot in preparation for this deer? Okay.
Well, that's pretty easy because it was only a 48-hour hunt.
Beautiful.
So I own some property in Kansas. I grew up there, and I had a farm there till I was 25. I took over the family farm and wasn't successful at that, so moved away and I ended up in New Mexico and found something else to do for a living. But anyhow, I kept some property in Kansas, and I've added to it a little bit. But this gets back to the question about trail cameras, and that's another somewhat slightly controversial issue, but man, are they fun.
Yes, they are.
They just change the game completely. They're fun and they're frustrating because you get pictures now of deer that 30 years ago you didn't even know existed. Some of these big old bucks are so nocturnal that you never saw them. You'd see a big track, and then you'd kill a 140-inch deer, and you'd think, well, that was him. Well, it probably wasn't. And once every couple of years you'd see a really big deer, but then you'd never see him again.
Right. It does. It teases you a little bit too.
Yeah, getting back to the story, I have a piece of property that I bought 2 years ago, and I bought it for hunting. It's an investment, but if there wasn't hunting on it, I wouldn't have bought it. So immediately found out there was a big non-typical on this property, and I hunted him pretty hard 2 years ago. He was a little over 200 non-typical. A lot of gnarly stuff on him. And one of my neighbors ended up shooting him. But
when you say you hunted him hard, what does that mean to you?
Well, in for about 3 weeks, because I don't live there, but I passed up every other deer that I had a chance at.
All right.
And that particular year, I had 18 Pope and Young bucks at under 30 yards in 21-day hunt. Just a phenomenal hunt. But if I hadn't been chasing that big non-typical, I would have probably shot about the third or fourth one, and I'd have had 3 or 4 Pope and Young deer under 30 yards through the hunt. So that's what trail cameras will do to you. You'll see that there's a really big buck there, and you determine you're going to kill him. And that year, I didn't kill a deer at all.
Right.
And,
but you saw a lot of game.
I did. Yeah. Who has 18 Pope and Young deer walk by during a hunt? That's just unbelievable.
The president of the Pope and Young Club does.
Well, yeah, and there's some hardcore hunters in Kansas and Iowa and Illinois who have those opportunities, but you have to hunt a lot to do that.
Right.
So
hunting hard to you means that you get out and hunt every day.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm mostly retired, so I don't work much in the fall.
Okay.
And I have a lot of. I'm really blessed in a lot of circumstances, so I can get out there and hunt a lot.
Okay.
But through this hunt, I had I only saw him once, but there was an older looking 10-point 5x5 that you could tell was an older deer, and I never had the opportunity at him. And he was a 150s class deer, probably low 150s. And my brother and I hunt together, and we look at the pictures and we talk about it, and we say, well, we should let this one grow, and this one looks pretty old. If he comes by, I'd probably shoot him, and you know how that is. And
sure.
So we had this older 10-point on the property, and never got a chance at him. And so then the next year, which was last year, I ended up early November. I went on a brown bear hunt on a Fog Neck Island in Alaska. So that took up the first 10 days of what normally would have been my whitetail hunt. And then one of my old friends drew a muzzleloader elk tag in New Mexico, started the 15th of November, so I had to stay and help him. So I didn't get to Kansas until the 20th of November, which was just killing me. Missing a whole lot of the rut, but you do what you do. And so I got up there and hadn't had any pictures of that old 10-point, so we thought, well, maybe a rifle hunter had killed him, and went out the first day, and I had 4 decent Pope and young deer within bow range. One was actually a 12-point, but he was probably 130s, and passed all those up, but I knew I didn't have a lot of time left. And then the second morning, I was sitting in a tree stand, and I wasn't feeling good about the hunt at all, which makes it even more interesting because the wind wasn't quite right. And I was thinking, man, the sun's just starting to come up. I maybe ought to move. And a couple of raccoons walked by down the creek, and I'm just kind of looking around, thinking, well, I might shoot one of those raccoons. And so I knocked up an arrow and was watching them, and then I heard something, and this old 10-point walks right by me at 15 yards, and I recognized him right off, and I had about 3 seconds to shoot, and I shot him, and he ran about 50, 60 yards and laid down behind a cedar tree, and I walked off and left him for a few hours and went back, and he was right there.
Just like that.
So,
excellent.
Yeah, and it was the old 10-point. He was still alive, and for whatever reason, we didn't have any pictures of him.
Interesting.
But he was smaller. He's actually a 9-point. It's kind of hard to tell in the picture, but he was just a 9-point this year, and he was a little smaller and going downhill and really gray-faced. But for an old deer, he sure tasted good.
Well, that's good news. That's really good. Sometimes they don't taste so good when they get that old.
Yeah.
So it was more of a culling activity where you're cleaning up an old deer that probably well beyond its prime.
Yeah, and I wouldn't really consider it culling because he's a real trophy. You get an old one like that, even if he's not 150 or 160 inch deer, that's hard to come by. So
I think you're right. Culling is a bad choice of words for right there, but that's a nice deer, no matter what.
Oh yeah, it was a great hunt, and it was only a 2-day hunt, so that gave me some time to work on the property and go around and see family. All my family lives in Kansas, so it helps when I'm hunting there. I spend the evenings with family, and we all have a good time.
Gotcha. Well, I have some questions from our social media Facebook page. And
okay.
And I earlier this evening, I posted a video of you and your buck and said, hey, we're interviewing the president of Pope and Young tonight, and I'd like to know what questions you have for Jim. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time going through some of these questions. And let's see. Let's start with Jamie Baker. Jamie Baker writes, with more states hunting seasons earlier in the year, like in August in some states, when is the club going to add categories for velvet deer or species like caribou, mule deer, whitetail, and even elk in some states? I think it's a little unfair of Pope and Young to ask a hunter to strip the velvet off his trophy in order to put it in the books. Why do you not have a separate listing? This is kind of like the 80% let off things with bows a few years back. Time to change. Now, before we answer that question, Garrett Tucker also commented on Jamie's comment and said, I think they did, dude. I'm pretty sure they've got velvet deer in there. So what do you have to say about velvet species or velvet deer?
That's one of the most frustrating parts about being president of Pope and Young is people don't understand who we are and what we do. We started accepting velvet entries in 1995. And for the first and it may have been before that. 1995 might have been when we accepted velvet entries in all antlered animals. But at first it was just mule deer because that was the issue then. But for the past 20 years, we've accepted velvet entries. We do not recognize world records in velvet entries, which is more controversial. Has somewhat to do with they're harder to measure. It's hard to get an exact measurement on a soft material. But we do accept velvet entries. We have for a long time. And coincidentally, we published our first velvet-only record book just a few months ago. It's a soft cover book for about $15 that has every velvet animal ever entered in Pope and Young Club. And, of course, mule deer is the big one, but it includes moose, caribou, elk. It may only have one elk in it, but a number of moose and caribou and all the other deer species. But we do. So if you have something that qualifies, get it entered.
Gotcha. So velvet is okay, not for the world record because the scoring's funky, but
yes,
as far as being entered into the Pope and Young record books, it's totally acceptable.
That is correct.
Okay.
And it's a separate category. It's not lumped in with the hardhorn animals. We have a separate category within the book. So the first listing are all the hardhorn typical animals, and then the second listing would be velvet typical, and then you go hardhorn non-typical, and then velvet non-typical.
Gotcha. Okay.
And just interestingly, historically, our oldest record in our books is a velvet Colombian blacktail taken by Art Young in, I think, 1925.
Oh, wow.
And this animal, this started the controversy back in the 70s when they realized that it was out there. And there's conversation going back in the 70s. And originally, in the 70s, they accepted velvet entries, but they gave you a 5% discount. So if it scored 100, you entered it at 95. And so, more controversy. And over the years, you listen to what people say. And if there's enough interest to do it, we try to change and make it work.
Gotcha. So it sounds like there's some old controversy there that's been kind of cleaned up, and we're probably just hearing some of the hand-me-down stories from generation to generation about what Pope and Young's position is on it. But in fact, that has changed over the years.
It has, yes.
Okay. All right. Brandon Brown writes, where can I find a Pope and Young class buck this year? I'd say
we're talking whitetail.
He just says buck, so let's just say whitetail. So I would say that's the Kansas. There you go.
Well, but it's too late to apply there, and you can't get an over-the-counter tag. So, let's say Nebraska. You can go buy a deer license in Nebraska. If you look hard enough, you can find a Pope and Young deer. They're not easy to come by.
Right.
I remember when I first started bow hunting, that was something really big to get an animal in the record book. And we really take that for granted because with just the sheer numbers of deer and the quality of deer management and trail cameras and information and media and books and all of that, it just seems like almost anybody can get one. Where 30 years ago, that was a big deal. Getting your first Pope and Young deer was something else. And if you just had one, that was really something. And now you have people, especially on television, who get 4 or 5 a year.
Gotcha. Let's see. Gary Parks writes, I know inside spread counts, but does tip to tip and greatest spread count also?
They do not. There is a place on the score form for tip to tip and outside spread, but that's just supplemental data.
Okay.
And it just, it's to give you a better idea of what the animal is. But it really doesn't mean anything.
Okay. Very good. All right. Gary Dale writes, what are good food plots to plant in very shady spots? Help. I don't know if this is really a Pope and Young question, but it does raise the question, are food plots fair chase?
Well, as of right now, they are, yes. But then you have people who think, well, it needs to be a natural food plot. Well, we've been manipulating animals to figure out how to kill them for 10,000 years. Whether you're pushing bison off a cliff or hunting a salt lick or whatever, this is just part of who we are. We're at the top of the food chain, and we use our brain to be more successful. And, planting different food is just part of that.
Sure.
Is it more difficult if you don't do that? Sure. Is more traditional. If you don't, sure. But, there's a reason we're at the top of the food chain, and it's because we have a bigger brain than everything else out there, and we know how to use it to our advantage.
Right.
And to answer that question, I don't know. I do some food plots, but most of my property is in farm country, so you really don't have to do a lot because there's plenty for them to eat. My recommendation was get online and look at QDMA, Quality Deer Management Association, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
Look at their website and ask that question. So,
and there are food plot specialists out there that can definitely tell you what grows in shady spots versus sunny spots.
Absolutely, and you have to consider whether you're in the northern region, the south region, the Midwest. Everything's a little bit different.
Right. Yep. Just find an expert in your area, and that will probably solve the problem. All right. Garrett Tucker writes, "How many Pope and Youngs have you killed?" Well, I can tell you just from what you described is that you may have been able to kill many more than you actually have.
Yeah, it's I haven't counted lately, but it's somewhere around 40 that I've actually taken.
And do you end up submitting them all to the books?
I got to thinking about that. When I was younger, I went through a period of time where I just couldn't afford it.
Yep.
And now I'm struggling to figure out which ones aren't entered and go back and get them entered, but I don't want to. I have to study that for a while. So there's probably 5 or 6 that I don't have entered that I'm at some point determined to make sure I get caught up.
Gotcha. A fellow by the name of Justin Rudder sent in a picture. It says it's a picture of him and a deer he shot. Now, he's posted this on our wall before. I recognize the picture, and he writes, "As Pope and Young." So I think what he's trying to ask is this a Pope and Young buck? So I can't show you the picture, obviously, because this is audio, but raises the question, what are the minimum requirements to get in other than, making sure you're not using the electronic devices or whatever the standard rules are. But let's say you've followed all the rules. What makes a Pope and Young buck a Pope and Young buck?
Well, there's a minimum number, minimum score, minimum measurement, whatever you want to call it. And we use the Boone and Crockett scoring system, which was basically finalized and they say perfected, which is another controversy, but it's been in use for 60, 70 years, and it's the standard of basically any other scoring system. Safari Club has their own system, but it's the only difference between it and the Boone and Crockett system is just minor details. So it's a number, and for instance, white-tailed deer, the minimum score is 125 for a typical. And depending on where you're at, for instance, I grew up in Kansas. If you kill a 3.5-year-old deer that's not a runt or malnourished or whatever, it will almost always make it, even most of the 8 points, the 4x4s. Now, there's a lot of states where they can't say that. Pennsylvania, you might kill a 5-year-old deer that still doesn't make it. It's all about genetics.
Gotcha.
So the system, you get the length of the beam, you get the length of each point, but not the forward pointing point, which would be the end of the beam, so you don't count that twice.
Right.
And you get 4 circumferences. Pretty much every horned or antlered animal we do gets 4 circumferences, and then you get the inside spread. You add those up, and you deduct the differences from each side, and that's how you come up with the total score.
Okay. Very cool. Justin Rudder writes, this is the same Justin that sent in the picture, and I think we just answered this question, but let me just clarify it. He said, "I shot a 145 8-pointer with my bow last year. How do I register it? My dad says I can get some sort of plaque for it." All right, so this raises an interesting question. So let's say you did shoot a nice buck and it got scored. How do you get it to Pope and Young to be entered or tested to make sure it makes the books? And I have another question after that, but let's cover that one first.
Yeah, great question. You start with, you go to the Pope and Young Club website. That's the easiest way to do it. You could call the club office, but to find the club office number, you're going to probably have to go to the website to get that. So you just Google Pope and Young Club and go to our site. It's pope-young.org, and go to one of the icons you can click on is Find a Measure. And you click on that, and then you can click on your state, and it'll show every measure in your state, and it shows where they're at in that state. So you find 1 or 2 that's close to you, and you give them a call. and set up a time when you can drop off the skull or meet them at a bow shop or, whatever's convenient, and you get it measured. And the first stipulation is to make it fair, we have a drying period, which is especially important on certain species, certain animals, but you can't get it measured before 60 days from the time you killed the animal. So say you killed the animal November 1st, on January 1st, start calling the measurer and set it up to get it measured. And one thing to consider is all of our measurers are volunteer. They don't get paid to do this. So if it's a little difficult to get it set up, just consider that, he has a job and he's a hunter and all of that. So give him a little patience. If it doesn't work out, call the next guy on the list. So take it to a measure and get it measured. And there's a few things you need to have when you go get it measured. We need, for starters, we would like to have your success photo of you and the animal in the field. And that's the first thing to bring with you. If it's possible, ahead of time, take a picture of the rack, set it down somehow, and take a picture from the right side, from the left side, and from the front. So we need 3 different photos, 4 preferably if you count the success photo. Then you need to enter the animal. You need to write a $35 check to the Pope and Young Club, which covers the cost of the reporting and administration and all of that. So you get it measured, you take the pictures, you write the check. Something that's a little more difficult is you do need to fill out a fair chase affidavit to swear that you killed it legally, ethically, under all of the rules. So you can go on the website and print out the fair chase affidavit. Okay. And what makes that a little bit difficult is you need one of your buddies to vouch for you. You sign the fair chase affidavit, and then you need somebody else to sign it. It doesn't have to be somebody that witnessed the kill, but somebody who knows you. So if some guy you never heard of calls the Pope and Young Club and say, hey, this deer was taken illegally, we have somebody to call and ask about it. We have a place to start.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like a reverse alibi. Somebody has to vouch for you.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and you do all that, and you send it in, and it's in the record book, and then we will send you a certificate that it made the records, and it's pretty cool. It is just basically a cardboard certificate. You have to provide the frame, but it's pretty neat, and you hang it up next to the animal. And there is another option. We do provide it in a form of a plaque, but it's a little more expensive. And there's like 3 or 4 different variations that some of them are over $100, but they are really neat. But all of that you can find on the website.
Gotcha. Okay. And finally, Benjamin Adrian writes, why are lighted knocks off limits if he helps us retrieve our wounded game? I think we covered this, and it sounds like this is one of those misconceptions about lighted knocks. And granted, this is part of why we're doing this podcast, is to kind of kill some of those myths out there about Pope and Young, or misunderstandings or changes in the rules. Lighted knocks are acceptable now as of a year ago, correct?
That's correct. Absolutely. And that goes back to, one of the issues back when we were some people were wanting to make it legal. Some people wanted to keep it illegal because they just didn't want to budge on the no electronics rule. There's a certain segment of the bow hunting hierarchy that never wanted to hear that a lighted knock helped you retrieve a game. That's akin to admitting that we have trouble finding game to begin with. So certain people within, I wouldn't say within Pope and Young Club, but just within our industry, never like to hear that and would never admit it. And to be honest, I don't know that that's really a valid point, because most of the time the arrow goes clear through or breaks and falls out. It's very seldom in the animal. But lighted knocks are legal, and if you have an animal to make a record book, get it entered.
Okay. Let's just summarize a couple things. So lighted knocks are okay.
Yes. Game
cameras, they're okay.
Yes.
Okay. Game cameras that send you pictures to your cell phone through cell technology, is that okay?
Well, that's a gray area. Technically, if you're using that to know what time to be there, then we're not so certain that it is fair chase. That's one of those issues where depends on how you interpret the rules.
Okay, so it sounds like these rules are not necessarily black and white, and there might be case-by-case situations where you are going to determine whether or not this was a full fair chase act.
Yeah, and that's possible, but to be honest, that almost never happens.
Okay.
And if there is something that comes up like that, we have a records committee,
right.
a group of about 15 individuals who have been measuring animals for a long time. And something controversial comes up like that, we give it to the record committee and say accept or not.
Okay.
And maybe once a year something like that will come up, but more often it's an issue where somebody who has had a game violation in the past, who was a little bit questionable in the past, are they okay now or are they not?
Gotcha.
So to, I guess, clarify, if you've had a history of game violations and you send in a record book animal and the club knows about it, then they're probably not going to accept it.
Gotcha. Okay. Drones, the use of drones. What's your position on that?
They're not acceptable.
Okay.
That is a fair chase issue. And I think it's a very short matter of time before every state makes it illegal to use them for hunting.
Yep. I know the state of New Hampshire just made it illegal this year, just actually a few days ago. Use of drones and or the use of cell technology through game cameras is now been deemed illegal in use of hunting. Okay. Yep. What about cameras mounted to your bow?
They are acceptable. The ruling, as far as the Pope and Young Club is concerned, as long as they don't cast light on the animal, which would be akin to spotlighting, if you're using your flash, and they don't aid in range finding or sighting in any way.
Okay.
And the original no electronics rule, I think that was geared towards laser sights. And I think they were conceiving that at some point, which we may already have a sight on your bow that automatically ranges the animal and automatically compensates the crosshairs.
Yep.
If that's not available yet, I'm sure somebody's working on it. But that's what they were getting at to say, that's just not right.
Right. Okay.
So that's what they're trying to prevent with the original no electronics rule.
Okay. Rangefinders, yes or no?
Yes, they're fine.
Okay. All right. Any other little tidbits of potential violations that you see from time to time?
Well, believe it or not, there's still a handful of people that think poison arrows are okay. And, I bet it was probably about 10 years ago, I ran into somebody in Colorado who was hunting elk that had pods on their arrows that have the, I can't even say the name, but the medicine that they use to put animals to sleep, they put that on their arrow and try that. So, that doesn't happen very often, but people just try it. Certain people will do anything to get a record book animal. But
that doesn't seem like that would advance the kill any more than other than if you just didn't make a good shot. Perhaps.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
Because they don't. If you make a good shot, they'll die quicker with a double long shot than they will with a poison arrow. But
heck yeah,
if you hit it in the leg with a poison arrow, it's going to kill it.
Right.
So that's definitely an ethics issue. And once again, it's that's illegal in every state. So I don't have to even talk about what's generally accepted. That's just blatantly illegal.
Right. How often do you have people trying to cheat? You ever had to kick somebody out after the fact once you investigated?
Yes, probably 2 or 3 a year.
Okay.
And out of we have over 100,000 entries, so that's not bad. And I'm sure there's a number of them that don't get caught. But if they get caught doing something illegally and the club finds out about it, we investigate it, and that's part of the job of the records committee is to gather information. And for the most part, if somebody does something illegal, most of the time the state organizations send us a letter telling us about it. So it's usually not too hard for us to find out about it.
Gotcha. Has Pope and Young employed X-ray technology in mounts after the fact?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
There may have been something in the past, but nothing I know of.
Okay. The only reason I asked that is I know there have been cases where record book antlers or mounts were residing in the record books. And after taking some x-rays on some of these specimens, turns out that they were just sheds mounted really well by a very talented taxidermist. You couldn't really tell unless you actually look deeper through modern technology.
Yeah. And to my knowledge, we haven't done that, but that doesn't mean we haven't. We've been doing this for 60 years, so probably at some point it's happened.
Right.
On a different note, if we have time, something that's really interesting as far as I'm concerned is partnering with the Boone and Crockett and a couple other organizations. We've really taken advantage of some genetic testing, and we started out determining the difference between the cow's deer in New Mexico, Arizona, and Mexico.
Yep.
And originally we were trying to figure out where the difference was in certain areas in Mexico, especially. Is it a regular whitetail or a cow's deer? And through that, we've determined that genetically there's a difference. You can tell for certain whether it's a cow's deer or a whitetail or this other kind of offshoot in Mexico. And we've taken that some steps further, and now we've tested mule deer and blacktail, and that's probably even more important because the difference between a mule deer and a blacktail is basically the top of the mountain range. So there's no doubt that there's some hybrids in there. So we're utilizing genetic testing to determine just exactly what species it is. And that's been very interesting to me as a record keeper to see just where everything stands according to borders and how much crossbreeding there is and what percentage of each animal it is. So that's been really interesting.
That is fascinating. I didn't realize that was being employed, but that's really, really interesting. And I think genetics, especially when it comes to game species, is quite it's a whole other aspect of hunting that, you got to be part scientist to really get into it as well.
Right. So now we do have the ability to test, particularly blacktail deer, because blacktail are smaller than mule deer. And if somebody kills one that they're certain is a blacktail that is just over the range, if they're willing to spend the money to have it genetically tested, which it might be $100, but we'll test it. And if it's enough of a percentage of blacktail, then they can enter it as a blacktail.
Gotcha.
And even more interesting, shortly after we did this project with the cow's deer, someone tried to enter a cow's deer from Arizona that was pretty close to world record that they genetically tested and found out that it was just a whitetail.
Kidding.
So that's all very interesting, and it will certainly help the integrity of our records moving forward.
Right. It keeps the records pure is basically what it comes
Absolutely.
down to between, maybe an X-ray technology, but genetic testing, that's tremendous.
Yeah.
I had two more questions just pop up as we're sitting here. I'm in a wheelchair, but I'm a damn good shot. Can you help me? That's from Tim Davis. Do you guys promote and sponsor any shoots or hunting for the disabled?
I'm going to say no, but that's changing as we're evolving and we're trying to figure out new ways to recruit. We're trying to reach new people. We're really trying to figure out how to do. Well, starting out, we're trying to figure out how to do some mentoring and opportunities for new young hunters and some training, and we're teaming up with a couple of organizations to try to recruit new hunters and give them opportunity. And, this circumstance will probably follow right along with that. Once we get to the point where we can do that successfully, then some handicapped hunts or some wounded warrior hunts or who knows where it's going to go.
Okay.
But that is something, we're really trying to figure out how to do that, and we're trying to grow the organization and be, really, we are the face of bow hunting, but people just don't know it.
Right.
So it's up to us. It's not their fault that they don't know it. It's our fault that we're not getting our message out. So over the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to be working really hard to be more out there.
Okay.
And we're going to do a lot of new and different, interesting things.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think being on a podcast is along those lines, spreading the word. It's a new media. It's a new medium that people really aren't completely familiar with, not even close to radio or TV, which of course has been around for years and years. Podcasting sounds like and smells like radio, but it's actually not at all. It's downloadable. It's on-demand streaming, and a podcaster can do it from their own studios in their own houses. They don't need a radio station to broadcast over FM, AM. So this whole thing is one of those ways in which we're hoping we can help you guys out to get the word out. One of the other questions just came up from Austin Walker. Do you have as much trouble in the central part of Wisconsin as the western part? I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means?
No, I don't. I do know there's some real issues with chronic wasting disease in Wisconsin, especially, and the age structure of the deer is falling because of it. Maybe that's what he's talking about. But, I'm 1,200 miles away from there. And
right.
we do have a huge presence in Wisconsin. I think that's the one state where we have the most members
okay.
Of any state at all. So I guess I'd need more specifics. But I know there's some real issues with chronic wasting disease in Wisconsin, and it's damaging the deer herd tremendously.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think we've covered all those questions. Jim, I cannot thank you enough for spending an hour with us and telling us about the origins of Pope and Young. And I had one final question about that in particular. Where did the name Pope and Young come from?
Well, Saxton Pope and Art Young were famous bow hunters from say 1918 to 1930, and they're largely considered the fathers of modern bow hunting, which is kind of hard to say when you consider they just shot wooden longbows. But they traveled all over the world. They actually got permits to hunt grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park for scientific purposes. They made videos in the early 1900s of African and Alaskan hunts, and so they were kind of the fathers of modern bow hunting, and that's where the name comes from.
Gotcha.
And they were both bow hunters, and their heyday was in the 1920s.
Gotcha. Okay. Jim, where does Pope and Young go from here? What's the future?
Well, the future is growth, as far as I'm concerned. The future is to get the message out and make every serious bow hunter understand that if they want to ensure the future of bow hunting and not lose out, that they need to be a part of this organization, because there's really no other national bow hunting organization that's going to work to ensure the future of bow hunting. That's where we want to go. And on top of that, we want to be more proactive with recruitment. We're going to partner up with some of the more educational organizations and provide some manpower through our membership for mentoring. And hopefully we can come up with not just a few, but a whole lot of private ranches to hunt on to bring new bow hunters in and give them the opportunity to find out what it's about. Hopefully partner up more with the industry to promote the sport and to help make sure that it stays ethical and some of this technology doesn't get out of hand. So that's where we want to go. I don't know that we'll be the NRA of bow hunting, but if we want to ensure the future of bow hunting, we certainly have to be more powerful than we are now.
Right.
And that's my goal over the next 3 or 4 years, is to figure out how to get there.
Okay. So if you're listening to this show right now and you like what you hear, how would you get involved with Pope and Young, even if you haven't shot a Pope and Young buck?
Well, and that's just it. You don't have to have shot a Pope and Young buck. Technically, you don't even have to be a bow hunter anymore. We changed that rule. Up until a year ago, you couldn't join the club unless you had killed an animal with a bow.
Okay.
So, but we created a supporting member category to where if you're a new bow hunter and you've never killed anything, you can join the club. And to join, find us online, pope-young.org, and fill out a membership online or print it up and send it in, or call the office and do it. But join the club. You'll get a quarterly newsletter which shows every animal that was entered from the last quarter, a whole lot of conservation information, a whole lot of bow hunting related information, and of course it's all of our club information tells you what we're doing and where we're going.
Gotcha.
There are some perks to being a member. You get a free subscription to Bow Hunting World if you're a member. You get discounts from a number of our corporate sponsors who are way too numerous to mention.
Right.
But some of the clothing manufacturers, some of the equipment people and distributors, and there's a lot of perks. But, in today's age, you just get online and you find that out. And if you have any more questions, my email address, I'm pretty sure, is on the website, along with just about every other board member. So get a hold of us and ask us.
And what is your email address, Jim, if people have just specific questions from this show?
It's my full name, and it's JimWillems@Q.com.
Okay.
And that's just the letter Q.
Beautiful. Well, Jim, this has been an absolute pleasure. I think we've opened up the minds of many of the listeners to what Pope and Young is today versus what it used to be, and cleared up a couple of those misconceptions. So I think we've accomplished our mission here, and we've covered where to find you online. So I sincerely appreciate you spending an hour with us, Jim. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Like I said, I'm here to promote the club. I'm here to provide information and do whatever we can to make the club stronger and, once again, ensure the future of bow hunting. That's what we're all about.
Well, thank you to Jim Willems for joining us on the Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. That was just an amazing interview with somebody that we hear, a subject matter we hear so much about, but we never really get to the bottom of it. And because rules change over the years, it was nice just to hear what Jim had to say about what's real and what's not. And in fact, his comment about lighted nocks being allowed now in the Pope and Young record books is going to change the record books, I think. And in fact, I think it may change a state record with our good friend Billy Arnold, who shot a potential Tennessee state record buck prior to the rule being in place.
Yeah, I hope that that Billy takes that thing and gets it done and gets that in the position that it needs to be credited for.
I agree. Now, it's already number one in the irregular category in Tennessee for Buckmasters. I don't know where it went with Boone and Crockett, but we'll see what it does with Pope and Young now that they are allowed to enter into that category. So it's going to be interesting. We'll keep you updated as we go along, because I talked to Billy today, and he's going to kind of bring us step by step as he progresses through this journey of trying to get a record buck or potential record buck into the record books retroactive now that the rule has changed. We'll kind of follow his journey along the way, and he agreed to do some tape with us as he goes.
Very cool.
Yeah, that can be very cool. Dusty, do you have a Chubby Tines tip of the week for us this week?
I do have a Chubby Tines tip of the week.
All right, man. Let's lay it down. What do you got?
Antler growth. Right now is the time.
That is true.
Right now is the time for antler growth. They need a little additive. The land just will not maximize their potential growth. So it's time to get you out some mineral, get you out a little additive to make them antlers go to their full potential. Antlers are a necessity to the body.
Right.
The nutrition of the body is more important than the antlers. But if you can satisfy the nutrition of the body, then any excess nutrition will go straight into antler. And that's a huge factor in the size and caliber of antlers you got in your area.
Right. And you're right. It is time to start thinking about that now, because by the time you're thinking about harvesting the antler, it's way too late. This is when they get all their excess nutrition. So now's the time to feed it to them. Absolutely.
Get it out there and get your deer, particularly your bucks. Mineral's going to help out your herd health, but in particular, get your bucks at their full potential of antler growth.
Right, exactly. Great tip. Great to remind everybody that it's time to do that. So, Dusty, where can we find you when you're not talking to me here on the Big Buck Podcast?
Facebook.com/Chubby Gobbler. Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. You can also shoot me an email at dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. If you'd like to hook up with me personally, you can get on my Instagram account at Chasing Antler. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Well, you can shoot me an email, as you had described, to me directly at j@bigbuckregistry.com. And if you'd like to shoot us an email about who you'd like to see on this show or subject matters you'd like us to cover, by all means, j@bigbuckregistry.com. Again, if you're on an iDevice, please leave us a review, a 5-star review, by visiting the search directory and typing in Big Buck Registry. And then you can, in fact, leave us a review once you get to that phase. If you would like to kind of change the way you listen to the show, if you have an iPhone or an iDevice of any sort, an Apple device of any sort, you can actually download our app now at bigbuckregistry.com/app, APP, and check it out. I've been using it. It's kind of neat. Dusty, I don't know if you've got it. I know you're not an iDevice user, but I'm finding it to be quite useful. It's actually got a lot of bells and whistles that the standard podcast player does not have. So,
yeah, absolutely. Even though I'm not an Apple device user throughout the day, I Still have Apple device at the house for the evenings. Yeah, great app, and I'm definitely finding it very useful, and it's something that everybody should check into.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. If you'd like to submit a buck, and the bucks are starting to roll in again, I don't know why there was a small lull where people weren't sending in their deer, but they're starting to come in droves again. And these are deer from the last year or two. You can go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and you can get all the instructions on how to submit a buck there. Basically, you can either upload a photo or it'll trigger an email direct to us. And all we're asking for is you give us the name of the hunter, the place of the kill, the success shot with you in the shot, and the year of harvest. And we'll get it posted on our Facebook page and get you in front of 150,000 plus diehard deer hunting fans. If you would please visit us at bigbuckregistry.com/pledge and just pledge your goodwill to this show. We would greatly appreciate that. Helps us pay the bills. And you can always find us over at the Outdoor Podcast channel now on iTunes or outdoorpodcastchannel.com. Did I miss anything, Dusty?
You can also go to bigbuckregistry.com/sponsor if you have a business or a group or a functionality that would like to team up with us and be a sponsor of the show.
Absolutely. That's something we are openly and have allowed spots that are still open if you'd like to be a sponsor of the show and get some listenership and get some videos on our monster Facebook page. You can go there, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry, or actually on the other social network, twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. And one other thing I've been playing around with is this new Periscope app that's owned by Twitter. I don't really know how it works exactly other than it's a live feed video. And I'm kind of bummed because we do all this by Skype generally, unless we're together somewhere in the some outdoor show or something like that. But I think the next time we're together, Dusty, we should go live with the Periscope app and just let people see how we actually do this.
Yeah, I agree to that 100% for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of boring watching us sit in our own studio. That's not really all that exciting. But when we're together, we're out and about in some major venue. Yeah, it would be kind of cool. So you guys can see the behind the scenes of the Big Buck Studios as we're on the road. Well, I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
Yeah, awesome show. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in with us right here on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm Dusty Phillips.
And I'm Jay Scott.
And we'll see you next week.
Can't wait.